Okay, I'm going to start with population in Russia. Russia is indeed the biggest by far in area, and it is the biggest in population for any country in the Russian domain. Let's start with population. And I'm calling my theme for this unfulfilled population projections. All right, I'd like to start at 1900. So beginning over a century ago. And at that time, there was the Russian Empire. And you can look at the colorful pieces here that show you what was controlled in the Russian Empire. And at that time, the empire had 125 million people. Okay, so vast territory with 125 million people. And that territory is quite similar to this, which was the Soviet Union. If you look at this and compare it to this, pretty close for that land area. On this map, you see the Soviet Union and you see 15 places numbered. Those are the 15 republics that became countries when the Soviet Union ended. Okay, but Russia, as we know it now, is smaller than either of those. Of course, it's smaller than the Soviet Union because the Soviet Union broke up and pieces went away. And Russia, the big piece, but the other pieces went away. So if we take the land that is now Russia and we think back to 1900, how many people lived in that territory that is now Russia? About 67 million. Okay, so we can start in 1900 and we can think about it in two ways. We can say how many people were in the empire, 125 million, or how many people were in what we now call Russia, the country, 67 million. Okay. In 1900, Soviet population experts, well, we called them demographers, right, predicted that Russia would have 400 million people in a century. That over those 100 years, from 1900 to 2000, Russia would increase, the Russian Empire would increase from 125 million to 400 million people. So that would be a very big increase, for sure. That would be a lot of people. Does Russia now have 400 million people? Well, if you think for a minute, you would realize no. Because you know that China and India have about 1.3, 1.4 billion people, right? Remember, those are the top two countries in the world. And you should remember that we are number 3. The United States is number 3 with about 330 million people. So no, Russia could not have 400 people now. If it did, it would be in 3rd place. No, no, Russia is not at 400 million. In fact, the closest Russia has come since the breakup of the Soviet Union was in 1993 at 148 million. So that is not close to 400 million, is it? Well, people still like to predict the future. That's what demographers love to do, predict the future. Here's 2 organizations that are predicting for Russia that Russia will get smaller. Both of these saying that by 2050, Russia will be down to 135 million. So a modest decline, but yeah, a decline. Not going towards 400 million. The illustration on the right side here, these are called Matryoshka dolls. Perhaps you have seen them. They're made out of thin plastic and they open in the middle. and you open one doll in the middle, there's another doll inside. And you open that next doll, and there's another doll inside. And you open the next doll, and there's another doll inside. They're stacked. And sometimes the very last one is really small. And they're all carefully painted in different formats. Yes, it's a very traditional Russian thing. Well, I think it's a nice illustration here for, Russia shrinking in population. All right, so why did Russia not make it to 400 million? I have several answers for you. The first answer is the demographic transition happened. You remember that we did the demographic transition early in the course when we talked about population patterns. So look at the numbers here. For that 1899 to 1913 time frame, Russia averaged 48 as the birth rate. So that would be 48 births per 1,000 people per year. You'll recall from when we did discuss the population topic and the demographic transition, I stated for you that 35 was my threshold. 35 or higher, that was a high birth rate. More than 35 births per 1,000 people per year was a high birth rate. So obviously 48 is definitely a high birth rate. We only found high birth rates in stages 1 and 2 of the demographic transition. Well, at the time here, Russia was in stage 2 of the demographic transition with high birth rates, but declining death rates. Russia had made some progress, just like many other countries in the world, in keeping people alive longer, providing more food, doing better medicine, those sorts of things. Okay, so the death rate was going down. Well, that means that at that time, the population was surging. The high birth rate and the lower death rate meant a lot of increase in population. So imagine you're a demographic expert at the time and the population is surging. Maybe you do feel comfortable making a big prediction that 400 million would be achievable. Well, the demographic transition happened, though. Maybe it happened faster than the experts thought, or maybe the experts didn't pay attention to it. But somehow I feel like they didn't anticipate this very well. We could blame the Soviet Union for some of this. Maybe that would help us blame the experts a bit less. Soviet Union happened, and well, yes, that probably did push down birth rates. Well, birth rates in Russia have been long for a long time now. They are low, about 12 now. And TFR, remember too, we studied this a bit long ago. TFR is total fertility rate, how many births a woman has over her lifetime. So the average Russian woman now is having 1.5 children. Obviously, if a total fertility rate lasts like that for a while, one generation does not replace the previous one. Mom and dad are not replaced in the population when you have only 1.5 children. So after a while, the population is going to go down. Yes. All right. That was one reason why Russia did not make it to 400 million. The demographic transition happened. Here's a second reason: war. Numerous wars of the 20th century that really cost Russia. Can we blame somebody for not expecting this? No, I don't think we can blame anyone for not anticipating several wars. Okay. First one on my list is not a big one in terms of deaths. It looks like 40 to 70,000 Russians died in this one, but it had an impact. So Russia and Japan went to war. Now think of this. Japan, of course, is an island country. So Japan would have a navy. Russia had a navy, but almost entirely on the other side of the country, in the Black Sea, in the Baltic Sea, even in the Arctic Ocean. They would have ships in their navy. So how do you fight Japan's navy if all your ships are on the European side of the world? Well, you sail them all the way around the world. So this is what Russian naval forces did. They sailed for a long time to fight the Japanese navy, and they lost. That has got to be demoralizing. You sail halfway around the world and then you get sunk and you lose the naval battles. Well, it also was demoralizing for Russian people. Russian people viewed themselves, Russian leadership viewed themselves as a world power. The United States was a world power, Britain was a world power, Germany a world power, France a world power. Well, they did view themselves, Russia, as a world power. No one at the time viewed Japan as a world power. So it was demoralizing for Russia to lose this war. Well, it came at a time where there was also some reform and challenges for reform of the government. Okay, they had a monarchy. The Tsar was the ruler. Tsar coming from the word Caesar. Okay. Well, this put pressure on the Tsar and his government. People now more unhappy. How could we lose to Japan? Well, this did prompt then some governmental reforms and a step further towards a democracy, towards change from just a monarchy. Okay, then we got to World War I in the 19 teens. So now these are big numbers. Now we have millions of people dying, a few million people dying on the Russian side. And they did terribly. The Russian military lost battle after battle after battle. They tried different approaches. Nothing seemed to work. The Tsar himself went to the front lines to exhort the troops, encourage them, inspire them. Didn't really work. So before the end, I was going to say in the end, but actually before the end of the war, Russia quit. Okay. They were just doing so poorly. They gave up. Well, this then too really focused dissatisfaction with the government, with the Tsar. How can we do so terribly? Well, and in this case, the push was sufficient. There was enough unrest, enough problems, and then this too. So all that combined led to the 1917 Russian Revolution. And the Tsar was overthrown. The Tsar and his family were taken away and killed. And it was time to end the monarchy and go to something else. But what is that something else going to be? There is no automatic change, automatic setup for the next person to go up, right? If our president dies, the vice president becomes president. Well, when you do a revolution, there's nothing nice and formal like that. So who is going to take charge? Well, it turns out they had a civil war to figure that out. And millions of people died in this. The Bolsheviks eventually did win. They were one of the factions of communists. But the Mensheviks were another possibility, a different faction of communism. There were still those who wanted to go back to the monarchy, and there were those who really wanted a democratic sort of society. a democracy. Well, they fought this out for several years. Millions of people died. In the end, the Bolshevik communists, they took over. Vladimir Lenin becoming the first ruler then of the Soviet Union. Now we've had several million people die from wars, but the World War II example is even bigger. So at least 20 million people dying on the Soviet side here, mostly Russian, dying on the Soviet side in World War II. And World War II is a huge point, huge time in history for Russian people, for Soviet people, for this country, because they were invaded. Think about US history and World War II. It's a very big deal for us, but we were not invaded. The only thing that could count is the attack on Pearl Harbor. Okay? None of the US mainland was invaded. Russia was invaded by the Nazi forces. Then Leningrad, now we call it St. Petersburg, was put under siege for several hundred days. Cities were destroyed. Millions of soldiers and civilians died. There are plenty of American movies about World War II, Saving Private Ryan and many others. Well, there are even more in Russia, movies about World War II. It's a much bigger deal. Well, yeah, we lost people, but not anything near 20 million. Here's a chart that tries to figure it out and tries to make comparisons. Okay, and at the top, it's the Soviet Union. And they're saying here almost 24 million people dying in the Soviet Union for World War II, between civilians and soldiers. If you go about halfway down the list, you see the United States. Compare that bar chart there to the bar for the Soviet Union. Yeah, our losses are not very many. Okay, so you can see why it is such a huge deal there. All right, then Afghanistan. Afghanistan, the Soviets invaded Afghanistan and lost thousands of soldiers there, but not millions. So again, it's sort of like the Russo-Japanese War here. The losses are in the thousands, but it's kind of embarrassing because Afghanistan is not a world power. And the Soviet military, well, in the whole of the Cold War, it was this comparison of the Soviet military and the US military. So the Soviet military should be able to just roll in and roll over Afghanistan. Or so they thought. But no, they failed in doing that. Actually, though, does that sound sort of familiar now? Because didn't we in America think we could go in and just crush Afghanistan? And then we were in there for years and years, right? And now basically we pulled pretty much everybody out finally, right? Well, yeah, that is kind of the history of Afghanistan. People try to conquer and it just doesn't happen, even though Afghanistan is not a wealthy or prosperous place. Well, this was a piece then that helped lead to change as well. Losing the Russo-Japanese War brought change. Losing World War I brought change, the Russian Revolution. Losing the war in Afghanistan helped end the Soviet Union. There's definitely other factors, but that was one of them. There might be an interesting trend there. Okay, well, I said for the 20th century, the goal was to get to 400 million by 2000. And one of the reasons was these wars. But I'm going to extend that just a moment because of other wars and now the war in Ukraine. So first of all, the Chechen civil wars. Now it's after the Soviet Union's broken up, and it's Russia, and Chechnya is one of the pieces, a small piece of Russia, but with a clearly different ethnic population and identity. Chechens are definitely different than Russians, but it is a piece of Russia. However, the Chechens decided that after the Soviet Union broke up, they didn't really want to stay part of Russia. They wanted to become their own country. So they asked to do this, and Russia said no. And so they had a civil war. And Russia won. Russia, huge. Chechnya, quite small. And then after a few years, they tried again, and again, Russia won. But about 100,000 people probably. It's hard. There's not good counts on this, but I'll put it in that ballpark. Now we have Ukraine. And on the Russian side, estimates are that between 7,000 and 15,000 people, soldiers, have died on the Russian side there. So we continue to have some small losses, at least for the Russian population, because of wars, even past the 20th century. And one wonders about the trends. Again, the Russo-Japanese War and World War I prompted the end of the monarchy. Afghanistan War helped end the Soviet Union. Could failure in the war in Ukraine end Vladimir Putin's role as president of Russia? Well, I'd like to say yes, that would be great, because Putin is the guy who's created this whole war, okay? And people are dying, and doesn't seem to be a great reason for this at all. We'll talk more about that, but that's interesting. Maybe the change will be the end of Putin. All right, well, if we take the 20th century anyway, it's quite reasonable to say 35 million people died on the Russian/Soviet side. And if we're trying to get to 400 million in Russia, and we take out 35 million during the 20th century, well, that's quite a deterrent to meeting that goal or that prediction of 400 million. So the first reason, well, one reason was the demographic transition happened. A second reason was wars. A third reason, Soviet atrocities. Soviet Union was not a very nice place to live. Often a very harsh place, often a very dangerous place. Very much so under Stalin. Okay. Lenin, not a terribly nice guy. Yes, there were some people killed under Lenin, but Stalin then, a very vicious leader and very paranoid leader. Lots of people dying under his rule. After him, a few people. More of a stagnating kind of country after Stalin. So how did this happen, and how many? All right, well, some examples. And the first one applies to Ukraine largely. Ukraine has a great location for agriculture. Has a mid-latitude location similar to some parts of the United States. United States, of course, well known for great agriculture. Ukraine has great soils, black earth soils known as Chernozem soils in Russian. Black earth soils, rich for farming. Sometimes Ukraine has been called the breadbasket of Europe. So Ukraine typically puts out good harvests, and they were doing so in the early days of the Soviet Union. Well, particularly around 1931, there was famine in Ukraine. What? That seems really strange. How could there be famine in an area known as the breadbasket? Okay, well, there were two things going on here. One thing, the relatively new Soviet Union was very much emphasizing urbanization and industrialization. They saw that to move the country forward, they needed to do a lot of industrializing, which meant urbanizing as well. And they needed to feed the people in those now more urban, more industrial places. So authorities went to places growing food like Ukraine and confiscated it to bring to the cities to feed those people. Confiscated it, didn't generally buy it. So you're a nice, good Ukrainian farmer, and the authorities come and say, today we're taking your food away. What? Okay. Well, if you objected, quite likely you were killed. If you didn't object, then where's your food and income, and how are you going to feed yourself? Lots of people didn't and died. Secondly, the relatively new Soviet Union needed to buy some things from other countries, and they could offer rubles to pay for those things. But the communist ruble, who wanted that? Okay, if you're in France and the Russian government says, hey, we'd like to buy these things and here's rubles to pay for them. No, France isn't interested in communist rubles. That doesn't help them. Okay, France would take francs or dollars or some other hard currencies. Hard currencies, those being those that are valuable anywhere. Obviously, that's dollars. Dollars are the most widespread currency in the world. Okay, euros now would also be. Okay, but yeah, historically, German Deutschmarks, French francs, Japanese yen, British pounds, like that. Well, Soviet Union didn't have much of those monies. They had their rubles. So how to get French francs or British pounds or American dollars so that you could buy other things with those same hard currencies? Well, you had to sell something then. What did you have you could sell? Well, Ukrainian wheat would be one of those things. Yes, there's a market for wheat across the world. So authorities went to Ukraine and said, hey, we're taking your wheat. We're going to sell it abroad. And if you object to that, again, probably you're killed. And if you don't object and your food is taken away, maybe you starved. Well, it turns out that several million people died because of this. Collectivization also has to do with farming. In the early days of the Soviet Union, it was understood, well, the new policy, the new government, communism, the government owns all the land. That's a pretty big change. Collectivization is the process of collecting all of that land. So imagine that you are a very small landowner. You own 10 acres of land. You scratch out a living on those 10 acres of land. But now a government official comes to you and says, hey, it's a new world, it's a new country, it's a new way of living, and it's going to be so good. It's going to be so great. Hey, we're taking everybody's land, we're putting it all together, we're collecting it, it's going to be great, it's going to be huge farms, it'll be so efficient, it'll be wonderful. And hey, we're going to take your land, but we'll put it all with everybody else's land to do that. And hey, don't worry, you'll be able to work on the land like everybody else and make a living wage. Okay, if you own 10 acres of land, do you object to this new policy? Well, when you've looked around and seen how harsh the government is, No, no, you don't object. It's only 10 acres of land. Okay, you'll become a worker on the farm. It won't be that much different than working on your own land. In contrast, what if you own 200,000 acres of land? What if that land has been in your family for generations? What if you're wealthy because of that land? You have people who work on the farm for you. You have your own farm laborers. And now the government comes to you and says, hey, it's a new world. It's a new country. It's a new system. It'll be great. It's communism. We're going to take all the land from everybody. We're going to collect it. It's collectivization. And yes, we're going to take your land and put it together with all these other pieces. We'll have these huge farms. It'll be so efficient. But hey, don't worry. You'll be fine. You'll be able to work on the land just like everybody else and earn a living wage. Do you object to that? Oh, yes, of course you do. You're the rich man. You don't want your 200,000 acres of land taken away. And wait a minute, what? You can work in the farm fields with the people you used to pay to work in the farm fields? No, you're the manor lord. You're not going to do that. So they kill you and move on. So millions more people die in collectivization. Is that a great way to start a new agricultural system, killing off lots of the farmers, especially the richest ones? Probably not. Next on the list here is terror. Under Stalin, a lot of the time, yeah, that was a common sense for society, terror. You didn't know when things could go very, very badly wrong for you. If you told a joke to your brother about Stalin and made Stalin look bad, but your neighbor overheard you telling the joke, and the neighbor reported you to the police, you could be sent away to prison camp because apparently you hate Stalin and the country. You need to go. You're sent away to prison camp. You probably never come back. You probably die in camp. People would have knocks on the door at 3 or 4 a.m. The KGB figured out that this was the time when people would be least organized, least able to resist, most puzzled, waking up in the middle of the night. You'd be told you had 20 minutes to pack a suitcase, and you were put on a railroad car and sent to Siberia. Yeah. Sometimes you are a very important person, but Stalin thought maybe you were too important and you becoming a rival to him. Maybe Stalin thought you were trying to replace him. Maybe you weren't, but Stalin was paranoid. And okay, just in case, you could be arrested and put on trial. Of course, the trial was such that you were assumed to be guilty, okay? And it was often called a show trial just to do something so it looked like it was fair. And then you were shot, or if you're lucky, sent to prison labor camp, probably in Siberia. Yeah, these were bad times, especially in the 1930s. Things got better in World War II because Stalin became nicer. Well, he felt he had to, because now you got this massive war and you want everybody to work hard for the war, whether you're a soldier or building bombs in factories, you need everybody to work hard. So Stalin became much nicer during World War II. Then World War II ended and Stalin went back to being very vicious. If you were in a German prison camp, if you're a Russian soldier captured during the war and in a German prison camp when the war ended, okay, you were released and sent back home to the Soviet Union, where you were probably arrested. It was assumed that if you were in a German prison camp, you were helping the Germans. It wasn't just bad luck and you were captured. You were clearly helping them, weren't you? So you're off and sent to prison camp. These were, yeah, really tough times. There's a very interesting book called Child 44. It's historical fiction, Child 44, and it's set in those early 1950s under Stalin. And it gives a remarkable sense of how it would feel to live in that place at that time. Then, as it is sort of a thriller or police procedural novel, it takes a actual Soviet serial killer from the 1970s and fictionalizes him into the early 1950s. So the story is based upon this Russian sort of KGB guy who is trying to investigate a series of murders of children. But he's told not to investigate it because the policy is that there are no murders in the Soviet Union because it's the ideal country. It's the ideal way of living. Okay, so it's this very interesting murder mystery kind of thing, but set in early 1950s Soviet Stalinist communism. If you ever see Child 44 on a shelf in a used bookstore, buy it. It was then made into a movie. Tom Hardy was the star in the movie. If you ever see that on Netflix, take a look. All right, so how many then? How many people went to prison camp? How many people were killed under Stalin? This is a very big question, and there's not a lot of great numbers available for this. When the Soviet Union ended, there were just months when some of the libraries were wide open and archives could be accessed, and Western scholars got to see some numbers, and then they were closed again. And one doesn't know how well these are numbered anyway. But one example I'm showing you on the screen here is that from those years, those many people were sent to prison camp. We could average that and say 1 million a year were sent to prison camp. So those would create big numbers. And again, most of the people sent to prison camp never actually came back. Prison camps were often in Siberia, often in very rugged circumstances, very cold winter circumstances, and often doing hard labor, doing mining or timber kind of things to be productive for the country while serving your time. So how many? Well, many have tried to figure this out. Here are some of the people who have tried to figure this out. So there are a few who say that 20 million people died under Stalin. Now, yes, a few people died under Lenin or a few people died after Stalin, but it's almost all under Stalin. 20 million is one estimate. At the other end, you see Alexander Solzhenitsyn, famous Soviet writer and dissident, who says 60 million, and American historian R.J. Rummel, who says 61 million. To me, my reading, my studying of this question, looking at some of these people's numbers, I feel 20 million is definitely too low. But my goodness, 60 million just seems astonishingly high. So the guy I like the best here is Steve Rosefield, who's in the middle of the list there, who says 29 to 38 million people died because of Soviet communism, because of Stalin mainly. Okay, well, if you take 29 to 38 million people out of the population, obviously that makes it much harder to gain a big increase, to gain the 400 million goal. Yeah. I like it, though, that Steve Rosefield takes this a step further. He says 29 to 38 million excess deaths. Okay, that's the first part. And he uses this term excess deaths. These are people who were killed because of the state, directly because of the government. This is not the 80-year-old man who died because of heart disease, right? Those are normal deaths. These are excess deaths because of Stalinism. But Roosevelt points out that, because of deaths, there are births that didn't happen. When a 25-year-old couple is sent to Siberia and sent to different labor camps, well, they're not together. They're not producing children. When a 31-year-old couple with one child, they're killed under Stalin, they're dead. They don't have any more children after that. There are births that would have happened had society just been normal, but did not happen. And Roosevelt estimates that at 9.7, or almost 10 million, what he calls avoided births. Right? Well, yeah, that's absolutely appropriate to count those two. So we have another about 10 million that should have been born under Stalinism, but no, didn't happen. All right, and then the Soviet Union ended without a great plan. At that point, Mikhail Gorbachev was the leader of the Soviet Union. He was kind of a young guy. He was in his 50s and was brought in as something of a reformer. Okay, Stalin had long ago been replaced by Khrushchev. Khrushchev, after a number of years, had been replaced by Brezhnev. Brezhnev was the leader for quite a few years, got very old. He was replaced by two other really old men, Andropov and Chernenko, who both lived short times. And then Gorbachev was brought in. And indeed, he was brought in as a reformer. Still a communist, but was brought in as a reformer. He was supposed to make some changes. His goal was to fix communism. Not to replace it, but to fix it. Okay? You don't get to be the leader of a communist country if you're going to blow it up. Okay? You got to be the leader through communist authorities, got to be a leader to try to fix it. He's the young guy to try to fix it. Okay? But then it was under his rule that the Soviet Union ended. Didn't have much of a plan for what was going to happen. Okay, so I'm going to leave it there. We're going to come back to this word, katastroika. Steve Roosevelt has made up a new word, katastroika, for what happens here when the Soviet Union ends under Gorbachev without much of a plan. Okay, so we're going to end it there for today, but my look at the syllabus says that Thursday is a Phantom Thursday, but it is a different sort of Phantom Thursday. It's the one and only audio day. You've had some video days where you have a video assignment instead of the Zoom room. This time you have an audio assignment instead of the Zoom room. You're going to listen to some podcast sorts of things and answer questions on a worksheet. This will be the last thing about Latin America and the Caribbean, as today, of course, we have started our new region. So to wrap up fully Latin American Caribbean, it's the audio day. Okay, so you know how it works otherwise. So we won't be in the Zoom room on Thursday. You'll be doing the audio day. So watch for the email that comes with the links to go listen this time and the worksheet with the questions for you to answer. Okay, so that's the plan. So today you've been here, right? So please do put in the chat that you're here as our way of showing attendance. You've done that before too. Okay, so no Zoom room on Thursday. Watch for the assignment. Do the assignment. Please continue to be posting things in the discussion board. Those are relatively easy points, and there's lots of those points, and those are points you need. Some of you did a great job in catching up a bit through spring break amnesty, but we all still need to be getting points on the discussion board. Okay, so do that. I'll be scoring the Latin American Caribbean map quiz that you put together, and I'll be putting out a grade update sheet in the next few days as well for you. So you can watch for that too on your email. All right, once you've put, I'm here in the chat, you're good to go today. See you in Tuesday. Thursday is audio day.
Professor, that audio, do you have a transcript for that?
Yes, so for you, yes, we're going to need to figure out how to do that. So I will check and see if the audio has a transcript. I will figure that out one way or another. If it doesn't, I will give you something.
If it doesn't, I need the link like ASAP, and I cannot guarantee that she'll have it ready for Thursday, just to let you know.
Okay, so the assignment will be due by the end of
more
Sunday.
Than 2 days.
Thank you. Yes. So the assignment will be due by the end of Sunday. And so we'll figure out one way or another. If there's no transcript, I can send it to you. And understandably, it'll take you some time to create a transcript for you to do. So one way or another, we'll take care of it.
All right. Sounds good. Thank you. I also haven't got any of the PowerPoints.
Okay, so that'll be part of my project for this week too, is to send you PowerPoints for what we've done recently.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay.
Bye-bye.